Julian Mercer stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, gazing at the Seattle skyline that seemed to bow before him. At 35, he'd built Mercer Technologies from a dorm room startup into a $3.1 billion empire. The latest Forbes issue with his face on the cover lay untouched on his marble coffee table. "Another charity event canceled, sir?" His assistant, Thomas, approached with a tablet. Julian nodded. Scrolling through the messages from Vanessa, his now ex-fiancée, explaining that their relationship had run its course. The timing, mere hours after he'd mentioned revising his prenuptial agreement, wasn't lost on him. "That's the third one this year," Thomas said quietly. "The third woman who loved my bank account more than me," Julian corrected, setting down his untouched whiskey. "I'm tired of being a commodity, Thomas." Later that night, scrolling through Vanessa's social media, already featuring photos with a hedge fund manager, Julian found himself watching a documentary about CEOs who went undercover in their own companies. A seed of an idea took root. 2 weeks later, Julian Mercer disappeared from public life, citing an extended sabbatical for personal growth. His executive team would handle operations. Only Thomas knew the truth, that Julian had moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment in Fremont, a bohemian neighborhood across town with fake glasses, subtly dyed hair, and a backstory as Jules Morgan, a freelance web designer struggling to establish himself. The small apartment felt like a movie set at first, someone else's life he was temporarily inhabiting. He bought secondhand furniture, learned to use public transportation, and practiced explaining his fictional portfolio to potential clients. For the first time since college, he made his own coffee. On his third day, he ventured to the Fremont Community Center, which needed volunteer help with their website. It seemed the perfect cover, using his actual skills while building his new identity. "You must be Jules," a warm voice greeted him. "I'm Olivia Reyes, the volunteer coordinator." Julian turned to face a woman with intelligent brown eyes and curly hair pulled into a messy bun. She wore jeans with paint splatters and a faded Community Art Matters t-shirt. "Thanks for coming in." "We're desperate for someone with your skills," she continued, leading him through the bustling center. "Our website is from 2010, and it shows." Over the next hour, Olivia introduced him to the center's programs: after-school tutoring, senior activities, art classes, job training. Her passion was evident in how she greeted everyone by name, remembering details about their lives. "So, what brings you to volunteer?" she asked as they sat with ancient desktop computers. "Most people with web design skills are charging big bucks." Julian had rehearsed this. "Just moved here, building my portfolio while I find clients. Figured I could help while helping myself." Olivia smiled. "Honest. I like that." He learned she worked full-time as a museum education coordinator while volunteering evenings at the center. The community center had been her childhood safe haven after her father died, leaving her mother to raise 3 children alone. "This place saved me," she said simply. "Now I help it save others." Throughout the evening, Julian watched Olivia navigate countless challenges, mediating a dispute between teenagers, finding emergency housing for an elderly man, all while cheerfully directing volunteers. When her phone rang, her smile faltered slightly. "Hi, Mom." "Yes, I'll stop by the pharmacy." "No, don't worry about the copay." When she hung up, Julian noticed the momentary worry in her eyes before her professional mask returned. As he left that evening, Julian felt oddly unsettled. In his real life, problems vanished with money and delegations. Here, people like Olivia fought daily battles with limited resources, yet maintained genuine warmth and optimism. "See you Thursday?" Olivia called as he left. Julian nodded, surprised to find himself actually looking forward to returning to the shabby community center, walking to his rented Honda Civic, a far cry from his collection of luxury vehicles. Julian realized this experiment might reveal more than he'd bargained for. He'd wanted to find someone who would value him beyond his wealth. Instead, he was beginning to question what he truly valued himself. Small kindnesses. 3 weeks into his experiment, Julian found himself falling into the rhythm of Jules Morgan's life. The community center had become a second home, where he spent evenings updating their website and helping with their social media presence. What had begun as a calculated social experiment was becoming something he genuinely looked forward to each day. "Jules, you're a lifesaver," Olivia said, setting down a cup of coffee beside him. It was from the local shop, not the vending machine. "I brought you the good stuff. You've been staring at that screen for 3 hours straight." "You didn't have to do that," Julian said, surprised by the gesture. "Consider it hazard pay for dealing with our prehistoric computers," she laughed. "Besides, Donna at the coffee shop gives me a discount." Julian had noticed these small kindnesses were Olivia's specialty. She remembered everyone's preferences, celebrated their victories no matter how small, and somehow anticipated needs before they were voiced. It was utterly foreign to his world of transactional relationships and calculated networking. One evening, after mentioning his refrigerator was empty because he couldn't afford groceries until a client paid him, Julian returned to his apartment to find a reusable grocery bag hanging on his doorknob. Inside were homemade enchiladas, a container of soup, and fresh-baked bread. The note simply read, "Everyone deserves a home-cooked meal. No strings, Olivia." Julian stood in his hallway, the simple bag of food feeling heavier with significance than he could articulate. When was the last time someone had done something for him without expectation of return? At the community center, Julian began noticing how Olivia stretched herself thin. She was always the first to arrive and last to leave, often skipping meals to help others. He learned from other volunteers that she had taken a second weekend job at a bookstore to help with her mother's increasing medical expenses. "You should take a break sometimes," Julian suggested one evening as they closed up. Olivia shrugged. "There's too much that needs doing. The world won't fall apart if you take an evening off." She gave him a tired smile. "Maybe, but some people's worlds might." She hesitated before adding, "My mom has MS. Her good days are becoming rare, and her medication costs have doubled this year." Julian felt the weight of his deception acutely in that moment. In his real life, he could have solved her problems with a single phone call, a donation, a foundation grant, connections to medical specialists. As Jules, all he could offer was a sympathetic ear. Their friendship deepened over the following weeks. Olivia invited him to free community events. Outdoor movies in the park, a gallery opening where her friend worked, a street festival celebrating the neighborhood's history. She shared her Netflix password when he mentioned he couldn't afford streaming services. When Julian fabricated a story about a potential big client meeting, she arrived the next day with a slender wooden box. "It was my grandfather's," she explained as he opened it to reveal a beautiful fountain pen. He was an engineer who designed bridges. "Said this pen helped him draft his dreams." She pushed it toward him when he tried to refuse. "It's just a loan. For luck." Julian found himself sharing more of himself than he intended. His actual childhood memories, his genuine thoughts and perspectives, only altering details that would reveal his true identity. For the first time in years, someone was getting to know the real Julian, not the billionaire CEO. One rainy Thursday, Julian arrived at the center to find Olivia absent. Concerned, he texted her and received a brief reply that she couldn't make it. Something in her uncharacteristically short message worried him. The next day, he spotted her hurrying from the center to her second job, looking exhausted. He followed, catching up with her at the bus stop. "Olivia, what's going on?" Her composure cracked slightly. "Mom fell yesterday. They're running tests. They think she might need surgery on her spine." She blinked rapidly. "The insurance is denying coverage for the specialist. I'm trying to figure something out. How much do you need?" The question slipped out before he could stop himself. Olivia's expression immediately closed. "I didn't tell you so you could offer money, Jules. I know you're struggling too." She touched his arm. "That's what I appreciate about you. You listen without trying to fix everything." Julian walked her to the bookstore, feeling increasingly trapped in his own deception. That night, he researched Olivia's mother's condition and discovered the specialized procedure would likely cost upwards of $80,000. He also learned Olivia had been quietly selling her late father's record collection, her most treasured possession, piece by piece, back in his real office the next day. Julian stared at his empire of screens and wealth. The contrast between his two worlds had never felt so stark or so troubling. This experiment had been meant to find someone genuine, but instead, it was revealing just how disingenuous his own life had become. As he watched Olivia working, herself to exhaustion over the next week, taking a third job stocking shelves at a grocery store during early morning hours, Julian realized this charade couldn't continue. Her kindness had never wavered, even as her own situation deteriorated. She still brought him coffee, still shared her limited resources, still made time to help others. The mask he'd crafted was becoming unbearable to wear. Something would have to give. The weight of deception. Julian woke at 4:30 a.m. to the sound of rain pelting his apartment windows. In his other life, he would have been rising to prepare for an international call or an early workout with his personal trainer. Today, as Jules, he was heading to shadow Olivia at her early morning stocking job at Greenfield Grocery. "You don't have to do this," Olivia had protested when he offered to help. "It's brutal, boring work." "You've helped me," Julian had replied simply. "Let me return the favor." Now, as they silently stacked cans and arranged produce before dawn, Julian watched Olivia move with mechanical efficiency despite her obvious exhaustion. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, yet she still managed to joke with the other workers and thank the manager for the opportunity. "Mom's surgery is scheduled for next Thursday," she confided during their break. "I'm still about $12,000 short, but I've applied for an emergency medical grant. Fingers crossed." Julian nodded, feeling the lie between them grow heavier with each passing day. In his pocket was his real phone, the one connected to his actual identity, where Thomas had been sending increasingly urgent messages about decisions needing his attention. His sabbatical had stretched from the planned 2 weeks into nearly 2 months. That afternoon, Julian slipped away to his real penthouse, showering quickly and changing into a tailored suit for an unavoidable board meeting. The luxury that had once felt like a second skin now seemed alien. As the board members updated him on quarterly projections and acquisition opportunities, Julian found his mind wandering to the community center's leaking roof and outdated computers. "Julian?" His CFO was looking at him expectantly. "Your thoughts on the pharmaceutical division expansion?" A sudden idea crystallized. "What's our current charitable giving directed toward?" The board members exchanged confused glances at this apparent non sequitur. "We have the annual technology scholarships and the coding camps," his philanthropy director replied. "About $5 million annually. Why?" "I want to establish a new initiative," Julian said, straightening. "A medical assistance program for patients denied insurance coverage for specialized procedures." The faces around the table registered surprise. "And I want to invest in community infrastructure in underserved neighborhoods." Back in his Jules persona that evening, Julian arrived at the community center to find Olivia on the phone, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "I understand it's not approved, but there must be some appeal process." She caught sight of Julian and attempted a smile while continuing her call. "Yes, I can hold. Again." When she finally hung up, she pressed her palms against her eyes. The grant fell through. Julian wanted nothing more than to tell her everything would be all right, that he could make this problem disappear with a single transfer. Instead, he sat beside her silently, offering the same kind of presence she had always given others. "I'm going to sell my car," she finally said. "It's not worth much, but it might cover part of the gap." "How will you get to your 3 jobs?" Julian asked. She shrugged. "Bus, bike, I'll figure it out." That night, Julian lay awake in his sparse apartment, the ceiling fan creaking above him. His experiment had veered wildly off course. He'd come looking for someone who would value him beyond his wealth, and he'd found Olivia, who gave generously from her limited resources without hesitation. But in finding her, he'd created a web of deception that threatened to destroy whatever genuine connection they'd formed. The next morning, Julian's real assistant Thomas called with news. "Sir, the board approved your medical assistance program on an accelerated timeline. The PR team wants to announce it next week. Make it immediate but anonymous," Julian instructed. "And I need a specific case fast-tracked. Spinal surgery for—" He hesitated, then gave the details of Olivia's mother's situation. May I ask what prompted this? Thomas asked carefully. Julian stared out at the morning light hitting the Space Needle in the distance. Let's just say I've gained some perspective during this sabbatical. 3 days later, Olivia burst into the community center, her eyes wide with disbelief. Jules, my mom got a call. Some new anonymous medical foundation is covering her entire surgery. They're even arranging for home care afterward. The hospital said it's legitimate. She threw her arms around him in an impulsive hug. Julian returned it, feeling both elation at her relief and dread at his continued deception. Over her shoulder, he caught sight of their reflection in the window, her genuine joy and his complex guilt, interwoven in a single embrace. That night, as Julian alternated between his two phones, his two identities, his two worlds, he knew the situation had become untenable. The medical foundation would eventually lead back to him. His board was growing impatient with his limited availability. And most importantly, his feelings for Olivia had grown far beyond the parameters of his social experiment. The truth would have to come out. And when it did, Julian feared he would lose the one person who had seen him, truly seen him, for the first time in years. Truth revealed. The morning of Olivia's mother's surgery dawned with unseasonable clarity, the Seattle sky a rare, uninterrupted blue. Julian paced the surgical waiting room, having offered to keep Olivia company through what would be a 6-hour procedure. His dual phones weighed heavily in his pockets, one buzzing with board messages, the other silent, containing only Olivia's texts. "You don't have to stay," Olivia told him, clutching a paper cup of hospital coffee. "I know you have client work." "It can wait," Julian replied, the irony of his statement not lost on him. His actual company was making decisions worth millions without him while he sat in this sterile waiting room, still playing the role of struggling freelancer. As the hours passed, they talked about everything and nothing, childhood memories, favorite books, dreams deferred. Julian found himself sharing more genuine truths than he had with anyone in years, careful only to obscure details that would reveal his true identity. "When I was little, I wanted to build robots," he admitted. "Started with taking apart every electronic device in the house," Olivia smiled. "And now you build websites instead of robots." "Something like that," he murmured, the half-truth bitter on his tongue. Midway through the surgery, Julian excused himself, ducking into a private consultation room to take an urgent call from Thomas. "Sir, we have a situation. Someone from the Seattle Tribune saw you entering the hospital. They're running a story speculating that your sabbatical is actually a health crisis. They've connected you to the new medical foundation. Our PR team needs direction immediately." Julian closed his eyes. "Tell them I'm visiting a friend's family member and supporting our new foundation's work personally. No health crisis. And the foundation's anonymity? Maintain it for now. I'll explain later." When Julian returned to the waiting room, Olivia was speaking with the neurosurgeon, who was explaining that the procedure had gone even better than expected. The relief on her face made his chest tighten. "Thank you for being here," she said later as they walked to the cafeteria. "I don't know how I would have gotten through today without you." The weight of his deception pressed down on him with crushing force. "Olivia, there's something I need to tell you," he began, but was interrupted by a hospital administrator approaching them. "Ms. Reyes, I just wanted to assure you that all arrangements for your mother's rehabilitation have been confirmed. The foundation has approved the highest level of home care." Olivia's brow furrowed. "That's incredibly generous. I didn't even apply for that part." "The foundation identified your mother's case as especially deserving," the administrator explained with a professional smile before departing. Olivia turned to Julian. "Confusion evident. It almost feels too good to be true. Anonymous donors don't just appear and solve every problem like this." Julian swallowed hard. "Sometimes they do." Her phone pinged with a news alert, a habit she'd developed to stay informed about community issues. Her eyes widened as she read the screen. "That's weird. There's a story about Julian Mercer, you know, the tech billionaire, being spotted at this hospital today." She showed him the article with its blurry photo of Julian entering the main doors that morning. "Apparently he's behind some new medical foundation." Julian watched recognition dawn slowly in her eyes as she looked from the phone to his face and back again. The glasses, the different hairstyle, the casual clothes, all suddenly insufficient disguises under her scrutiny. "Jules?" Her voice was barely audible. He nodded once, unable to speak. "You're Julian Mercer." It wasn't a question. The cafeteria continued its busy rhythm around them as Olivia processed this revelation, her expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally, a hurt that cut Julian more deeply than he'd anticipated. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. Julian explained his experiment, the gold diggers, the loneliness behind wealth, his desire to find someone who valued him for himself. Each word felt more hollow than the last as he watched Olivia's face harden. "So I was what? A case study? A social experiment?" Her voice caught. "Was anything real?" "Everything with you was real," Julian insisted. "More real than anything in my actual life." Olivia stood, gathering her belongings with shaking hands. "I need to check on my mom." "Olivia, please." "I can't do this right now, Jules. Or Julian, or whoever you are." Her eyes, when they met his, were filled with tears she refused to shed. "My mother just had major surgery. I have 3 jobs to get back to, and apparently I've been pouring my heart out to someone who doesn't even exist." She left him sitting there, surrounded by the institutional buzz of the hospital cafeteria, his carefully constructed experiment collapsing around him. That night, Julian returned to his penthouse for the first time in weeks. The luxury that had once felt like a birthright now seemed empty, sterile. He poured himself a drink and stood at his wall of windows, watching the city lights below, so far removed from the community that Olivia served daily. His phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "PR crisis averted. Board pleased with foundation launch. When will you return full-time?" Julian didn't respond. Instead, he pulled out his other phone, Jules' phone, and typed a message to Olivia that took him an hour to compose. A sincere apology, an explanation that still felt inadequate, and finally a promise to respect her space while hoping she might eventually forgive him. The message remained undelivered. Olivia had blocked his number. Beyond appearances, 3 months passed. Julian had formally returned to his role as CEO, though something fundamental had shifted in his approach. The medical foundation had expanded, with a special focus on community clinics in underserved neighborhoods. Mercer Technologies had launched a digital literacy initiative, providing free training and equipment to community centers across the city, starting with the one in Fremont. Julian had not contacted Olivia again, respecting her clear wish for distance. But he'd ensured her mother received the best possible care, anonymously covered the remainder of her student loans, and arranged for significant funding for the community center's programs, all through foundations and third parties that couldn't be traced directly to him. On a rainy Tuesday evening, Julian found himself driving his own car, not a chauffeured luxury vehicle, to the Fremont neighborhood. He parked across from the community center, watching volunteers come and go. He'd meant only to drive by, yet found himself unable to leave. "You could just come inside instead of lurking suspiciously in your car," Julian started at the voice. Olivia stood beside his window, an umbrella tilted against the rain, her expression unreadable. After a moment of shocked silence, Julian stepped out of the car, rain immediately soaking his expensive coat. "How did you know I was here?" he asked. "Mrs. Abernathy called me," she said, and I quote, "That handsome web designer who disappeared is sitting in a fancy car across the street looking miserable." A ghost of a smile touched Olivia's lips. Though she did note the car was a downgrade from what she expected a billionaire to drive. Julian glanced at his modest Audi. "I sold the others." They stood in awkward silence. "Rain pattering on Olivia's umbrella? Your mother?" Julian finally asked. "Recovering well, making ceramic planters and terrorizing her physical therapists." Olivia studied him. "You look different." Julian ran a hand through his hair, which he'd kept in the style he'd worn as Jules. "I am different." "Come inside," she said after a long moment. "You're getting soaked, and Mrs. Abernathy will never forgive me if I don't bring you in to explain yourself." The community center was warm and buzzing with activity. New computers lined the walls, the roof no longer leaked, and the previously peeling paint had been refreshed. Several volunteers nodded at Julian with curious glances as Olivia led him to a quiet office. "You've been busy," she observed, gesturing to the improvements. "Not directly," Julian clarified. "I wanted to help, but not intrude." Olivia sat behind the desk, now the volunteer coordinator officially, he learned. Having been able to reduce her multiple jobs to just this role and her museum position, "Why are you here, Julian?" she asked directly. He took a breath. "I missed you," he admitted simply. "I missed this place. I missed who I was becoming when I was here." Olivia's expression softened slightly. "And who was that?" "Someone who measured success differently. Someone who saw value beyond balance sheets." He met her gaze. "Someone worthy of the kindness you showed him?" Olivia looked down at her hands. "I was angry for a long time, not because of who you turned out to be, but because I thought everything, our friendship, our conversations, was fabricated." "None of it was fake," Julian said earnestly. "The circumstances were false, but everything I shared with you, my thoughts, my feelings, my past, that was all real. The only lies were about my financial situation and current job." "Pretty significant lies," she pointed out. "Yes," he acknowledged, "and I'm sorry. More sorry than I can express." Olivia studied him, her analytical gaze unchanged from their first meeting. "You've done a lot for the center. For my mother. For me, apparently," Julian shook his head. "I didn't do those things to buy forgiveness. I did them because this community matters, because helping others matters. You taught me that." Rain drummed steadily on the new roof as they regarded each other across the desk. "I brought something," Julian said finally, reaching into his pocket and placing a familiar wooden box between them. "You loaned this to me for luck. I wanted to return it." Olivia opened the box, revealing her grandfather's fountain pen. Beside it lay a small notebook filled with Julian's handwriting, ideas for community programs, sketches for educational apps, notes about improving access to technology in underserved areas. "What's this?" she asked, turning the pages. "My actual dreams," Julian said quietly. "Not the ones that made me rich. The ones that might make a difference." Olivia closed the notebook, her fingers lingering on its cover. "I have a board meeting in 5 minutes. We're discussing expanding our youth coding program." Julian nodded and stood to leave, understanding the dismissal. "The meeting's in here," Olivia continued, surprising him. "And we could use someone with actual technology expertise, not just foundation connections." She gestured to a chair. "If you're interested, it wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was an opening, an invitation back into the world where he'd found something more valuable than all his wealth. Authenticity, purpose, and the possibility of genuine connection." "I'd be honored," Julian said, taking the offered seat. As community members filed in, greeting Olivia warmly and eyeing Julian with curious interest, he felt the weight of pretense fully lift from his shoulders. Here, he would need to earn respect through actions and ideas, not accounts and assets. Here, with Olivia's cautious but real smile across the table, he had the chance to build something true. The rain outside had stopped, and through the window, Julian could see a rainbow forming over the neighborhood, an apt metaphor for the path forward. Not an easy one, perhaps, but one illuminated with the promise of something authentic and enduring beyond the storm of deception. For the first time in his adult life, Julian Mercer felt truly rich.